Hello, everybody. My name is Andrii Ianitskyi. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and our guest today is Alan Riley. He's a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and he's also a professor at City Law School. Maybe you can add something, Alan?
Yeah, I'm not a professor at City Law School. I am a visiting
Sorry.
professor at the College of Europe in Natolin. So that's just to be
Oh
clear.
no.
But don't worry about
Okay.
it.
But you will be here in Kyiv next month on one event about energy security. That event will be hosted by Dixi Group Analytical Center, Ukrainian Analytical Center. What do you think about Ukrainian winter, this war winter? Will it be tough, more tougher than previous?
It could be. I mean, one of the difficulties is, on one level, of course, there is a kind of fantastic narrative, a true narrative of the heroic and valiant efforts of the Ukrainian state, Ukrainian energy companies, and above all, the engineers often on the front line, many of whom have been killed, keeping the networks up and running. And that's all true. And a lot of effort has been made to keep the network in place. A lot of work has been done. A lot of repairs have been carried out. But one has to look at the fundamental sort of vulnerabilities of the system. And that's what concerns me. The difficulty, as I see it, is this. The situation now in the beginning of the winter heating season, or we're now in the winter heating season, is worse than it was last year. Because essentially, although a lot of power generation capacity has been restored, we're still less than we had in the beginning of the winter heating season of last year. And the problem is the Russians almost certainly have more missiles and more drones that they have stockpiled and are waiting to just work out where they're going to hit the infrastructure during this winter. So that, I think, is a lot of the danger. And of course, whilst it's true that Kyiv itself has got a lot of air defense around it, other Ukrainian cities have less. And crucially, it's extremely difficult to ensure air defense across a lot of the energy assets. And whilst I understand the focus on the networks, one of the dangers, I think, is the attack on the assets themselves, the power generation capacity. So that is, I think, a real concern for this winter. Now, there are things that can be done. I mean, we can look at potentially increasing imports of electricity from EU countries. That's one option. And there are a number of ways that can be done. I mean, obviously, I think in June or July, NSOE increased the trading limits capacity. There's a special emergency arrangement as well. But I think those things have to be reviewed and looked at. And we also have to look at the issue of increased power generation capacity. But it is difficult. And of course, what makes it worse is that the Ukrainian power generation network, because of the historic links due to the Soviet Union, the Russians know pretty much where everything is. And that's the interesting parallel to state on state warfare, where you're attacking power networks. The nearest parallel is, in fact, World War II, when the British and Germans were cheerfully bombing each other's power networks. But the difference there is neither the UK nor Germany actually knew where everything was and how everything worked. And there's a great story about the German network, was that despite the British and Americans actually having quite a good understanding, J.P. Morgan in the 1920s and 1930s financed most of the German power network. So they had all the German power plant plans in New York. But so they were able to, that helped. But the fact is they didn't actually understand the vulnerabilities in the system to a granular detail in the way that the Russians now know of the Ukrainian system. So actually, the Allied powers, despite bombing a lot of the network, didn't understand the vulnerable points which would have made their bombing much more devastating. Whereas, unfortunately, the Russians know that in relation to the Ukrainian network. And I think that is a huge part of the trouble here in terms of the vulnerability of the power networks.
So
And of course,
the main challenge, Russian bombs, or maybe the system itself that should be changed. What's the main challenge?
well, I think the main challenge is, I mean, obviously that's the threat. And in terms of dealing with the threat, what I argue is that there are a number of issues. One of them is, and again, there are World War II comparisons here. I mean, when I was one of the World War II comparisons is in terms of creating parallel networks, of camouflage, of providing a degree of sort of hiding capacity to the networks. Now, this is actually possible. I mean, it's very interesting is that in Britain after the Second World War, one of the difficulties was moving a lot of the transformers because we put them in so many concrete bunkers to protect them from enemy action that, you know, for a long time, you know, the cost of moving these things became huge because, you know, they were all kind of fixed in place with all of this under tons of concrete. So but there are ways of doing that, and also camouflage and so forth. So there are things that could be done, and one of the arguments is to what extent can you build almost a mixture of parallel networks and distributed energy using additional power generation capacity, that sort of thing. And I think there are lots of things that we could do with that. And I think what the government is largely focused on, understandably, is the networks and the transformers and so forth. But I think there is actually a bigger opportunities to do things. And given, unfortunately, that the war is going to go on for some time, the argument for dealing with this, because this is not short term, it is longer term. It's not just for this winter, it is for next winter. And we have to think about how we do this and how we make it work. So that's where I'm sort of arguing we should be looking at trying to deal with these things.
About long-term decisions, how do you see the post-war energy structure in the EU, and what's the role of Ukraine in this system?
Well, actually, I think the Ukrainian system could be very positive indeed. I mean, let me give you, you know, if you look at the original gas, let's start with gas. The original power, the gas network. The idea was you had the Europeans with about 2 months worth of storage. And that, of course, is 2 months worth of gas storage for an average winter. If there was a cold winter, the whole idea was that there will be storage in Ukraine and there would be huge surges of Russian gas through the Ukrainian network into Europe. And that was how the system was supposed to work. Now, if you largely cut off the Russian system, what you've got inadequate amounts of gas storage, but you have a huge Ukrainian storage. And we can potentially bring in gas, LNG, Norwegian, and gas via through the Balkan network into Ukraine, and expand the Ukrainian storage, which is already Europe's largest at about 32 billion cubic meters. We can extend it, increase it by about 20 billion cubic meters of capacity, and it becomes a huge energy security hedge for Europe. And to some degree, that's already happening because European storage is now 99% full, and there is additional European gas going into Ukrainian storage. So it becomes a huge energy security hedge for Ukraine. I think that is something which is, I think, very, very, it's got a lot of potential attraction for Europe for the future. I think that is something which could really help. The other issue is that for a whole host of reasons, partly to do with corruption, partly to do with bureaucratic dysfunctionality, and partly to do with Russian meddling, there is a lot of gas in Ukraine, and that gas can potentially be increased and developed so Ukraine itself can be a gas supplier into the European Union. And of course, I know that a lot of people are focusing on the energy transition and so forth, and that is critical. But the point to remember is that as long as we don't have cheap grid level battery storage, we are going to need balancing capacity, which will be principally gas. So the gas is going to play a role in the European energy market for a very, very long time to come. So the idea that somehow we are just going to be able to deploy renewables, this will not work unless you have grid level, cheap grid level battery storage, and that does not exist. So until it does exist, that is an issue. It certainly it doesn't exist, and there is no obvious way of creating that at scale cheaply. It's scale cheap, which is the thing. Now that may well happen, but that is not on a 20 years time scale at least. So gas is going to play a significant role in the network, whatever else is going to happen, and it's part of European supply security. So I think that is one of the areas where Ukraine can play a very, very significant role.
So,
sorry, go on.
Yeah. I want to talk more about electricity only. If we talk about export and import,
Okay.
This part of this mosaic.
Well, that's electricity is the power network. So that's the gas issues. On the electricity issues, I think there are a number of advantages. Ukrainian reconstruction provides a huge opportunity, and I don't think a lot of people appreciate this. One of the difficulties in Europe, both with renewables, in fact, with any energy development of any energy generation, whether it's wind or solar or nuclear or whatever, is often you get yourself into huge difficulties with permitting and planning processes. Everything takes forever. Whereas with Ukraine, in reconstruction, Ukrainian reconstruction is not just an opportunity to rebuild the energy infrastructure on a greener platform and build it for Ukraine. There is an argument, I think a very compelling argument, that Ukraine and the investors in the Ukrainian energy infrastructure aren't just interested in building new power generation capacity for Ukraine, but also building it for export. Because of the difficulties of developing sufficient power generation capacity in Europe, there is an argument you're able to use reconstruction as an opportunity to build it for in Ukraine and then export it into the Union. And I think that is something which makes a lot of sense, because you're able to just get a lot more done a lot more quickly, and add significantly to power generation capacity to meet all of the green targets and to underpin European supply security.
So if Ukraine plans to join the EU in future, we have to reform our energy sector to more green way and to more European rule way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it is that there are a number of elements. I mean, one of the issues is what I think we have to look at is how you do it. So there is an argument which we should try and go for the most latest technology. We should not. I mean, one of the issues here is, I mean, Thomas Ilves explains this really well, the former Estonian president, and he said that when Estonia became the state independence was restored in 1991. He said that they were offered a sort of up-to-the-date electromechanical telecommunication system, I think from Finland. And he said, we decided not to go for that because we worked out that for the future, what we wanted, we didn't want to have a legacy system, which was, sort of just about or just past state of the art then, which was much better than our Soviet system. We wanted to be in advance, which would create us more opportunities for the future. And I think that insight applies equally to the energy sector in Ukraine. What you don't want is bog standard solar and wind power. What you want is the most advanced, ideally not using supply chains from China, not using stuff which is average, for example, solar, which provides a degree of power generation, but not the highest. So what you want to be looking at, I think, is to try and raise the standards. The government needs to raise the standards as high as possible to push all of the investment in the direction of the most advanced technologies. And I think there's also another argument about this, is that what it's partly about is talking with the European Union about creating supply chains which which actually help anchor the development of European production at a very high level, which involves much more advanced research and development product coming out into the supply chains, much more advanced solar panels, for example, much more efficient wind, all of this and whatever else is coming in, perhaps biofuels or whatever, to try and massively reinforce the Ukraine as the technological edge of alternative energy developments. And I think that, and then you can use reconstruction like that and potentially use that as an anchor for what is to come. And that would massively enhance Ukraine's opportunities of the future. And most crucial thing is not to fall into a legacy trap of taking stuff which is okay, complies with the targets, but actually is not going to help that much in the future and may need to be replaced. Learn the lessons from what everyone else is doing.
We talk a lot in Ukraine about energy decentralization. What role can local generation and territorial communities play in the restoration of Ukraine energy system in future?
Well, actually, this may actually fit into what we were talking about earlier. I mean, one of the arguments currently about Ukrainian defense, Ukrainian capacity to sustain resilience of the energy system, is to argue for decentralized power generation. So there is an argument, for example, at the moment, you know, if possible, potentially through international support, is to get a lot of local communities and cities obtaining say 20 to 40 megawatt gas-fired power generators, and stick them in each of the regions and cities, so that the local authorities and local government have access to these. And then with that, of course, once you've got the power generation, which is there as a distributed level, to create an alternative system which the Russians don't have so much information about, easier to protect because it's new, you can put it in place. You can use that post-war to act as the core balancing element of a solar and wind rollout, which is a local rollout. So you create from that a greater degree of developed distributed system, enhanced with a lot of green power at a distributed level. And I can see how that could work. That might be quite attractive for the future.
Yeah, so tricky questions about sanctions and nuclear security in the world. You know that state-owned Russian company Rosatom is connected with occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, and we know that Russia is their state company connected with aggression and with war. But unfortunately, in the world, there are no any sanctions against this company. Should we expect, and when should we expect sanctions against the Rosatom? Is it possible?
I think it is. I mean, one of the issues which I think is worth appreciating is that with the way the war is operating, originally, I think both the Ukrainian expectation and the Western allies' support expectation was the war was going to last a year, 18 months. I think everybody now is saying it's going to last, unfortunately, much longer. And I think that recalibrates the potential for Western action and for Western sanctions. So I think we will get to Rosatom sanctions. I am not sure at what point, but I'm pretty sure we will get there, because the incentives to move in that direction just grow as the escalation of the war and the radicalization of the Russian state continues.
And last question about energy security dialogue forum in Ukraine. What do you think? Is it some important event or not so important? Why it's necessary to attend the third Ukrainian energy security dialogue?
It's important because it is currently part of one of the vital pillars of Ukrainian security. It's not just a question for professors to discuss over a cup of coffee. It is actually really serious, and it is part of one of the major pillars of Ukrainian and European security.
Thank you, dear Alan Riley. Could you say your title, correct title, one more time?
I'm a visiting professor at the College of Europe and senior non-resident fellow at the
Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Yeah. Thank you.